All right, welcome everybody. I am your host, Ethan Schindler. I am excited to have this conversation about fueling your life. We want to give you some real-world nutrition tips for a balanced and energized lifestyle. And I'm really excited to have some expert panelists, folks who have some great experience on the topic of nutrition. And it's a really diverse group of folks. So I am excited to host them as well. I'm looking in the audience, and we don't have a lot of people yet, so we're just going to wait for a couple seconds. But I'm also going to say this a couple times throughout the episode. As people have questions, pop them into the chat or put your hand up. I think you can do a live question if you want, and we'll work that question into the topic or into the discourse. So. We're going to start with some introductions. I'm going to go around the room here. Just give us a short intro to, who you are. Audience is probably going to want to know where you are. They're also probably going to want to know a little bit about your experience in nutrition and why you might be on this panel as an expert today. So on my screen, the top right person here is Jennifer Redding, so we'll start with you.
Going way back, but not too far. When I originally went to school, I went to school for natural sciences, so I wanted to be, learning about biology, learning about marine biology, and so forth. After I graduated, I still continued to kind of work in that a little bit. Actually dabbled in, I think I mentioned you earlier before the call, was that I actually worked in marketing for a period of time too for research-based companies, but about 3 years ago, I fell ill, and I actually was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. After I was diagnosed, I really got interested in the field of nutrition and, this whole industry. I had initially had kind of a discouraging path when I got sick, so nutrition wasn't even on my mind. And I stumbled upon somebody who was involved in nutrition and kind of opened my eyes about, how I could approach an autoimmune disease differently without drugs and biologics. So she really inspired me, and I started on my master's, got into my master's, and actually decided to jump over to my PhD. So I'm currently starting on my PhD and starting that work, and so my direction and my focus in my PhD is nutritional biochemistry. So I want to understand how what we eat influences disease and illness. So that's and I'm in Bastrop, Texas right now. I'm originally from Colorado, but I just moved out here about.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to learn from you today, so thank you so much for that introduction. Yeah. And I'm just going to kind of go around the circle here. Sean McQueen, could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, and Ethan, just a shout out to you. Thank you for putting this together. This is awesome. Name is Sean McQueen. I live in upstate New York, about 90 minutes north of the city, 45 minutes south of Albany, the capital. I own a strength and conditioning gym of 12 years. I went to school after I left the military, did 4 years in the Air Force. After I left that, I was kind of in this lost stage of life, and I went to the University of Delaware for a year and a half under the dietetics program to become a dietitian. And it was in that program that I did not like the way that the system was set up and where I felt dietitians were getting shaped to go, or at least where that particular group was getting funneled. So I wanted to be more at the beginning and address the strategies and the behaviors versus at the end where they were, steering that group. So I left that program, and this was around the time that I really got involved in the health and fitness space. And across the next 12, 13 years was obviously just an evolution of learning and diving deeper into that, and have changed countless lives and utilized specific strategies to help people overcome these basic struggles that I think myself and all of us have faced with when it comes to nutrition, and just this overwhelming amount of challenging and conflicting information, and trying to simplify it and build sustainable habits that they can take with them, whether that's working together for 6 months or a year, and then graduate out into their own experience with it and take those principles to succeed and continue to feel good and live the best life that they can.
Awesome. Well, cool. I'd love to. I'm looking forward to bringing your knowledge into the conversation as well. So thank you. And then we'll finish here with Adam Badger. Introduce yourself, please, sir.
Hey, what's up, guys? You got everyone can hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, cool. So my name's Adam Badger. I am actually also in upstate New York, Sean. I live in Clifton Park, New York, which is about 20 minutes north of Albany. I've been in the fitness industry for just over a decade now. Started out as a personal trainer in a big box gym and did that full time for the first few years. Then went into my own business doing mostly in-person coaching. And just through my experience, I realized that where people needed the most help was the outside of the gym habits. So I tend to work mostly with everyday folks, busy adults who are married, have full-time jobs, have kids. And my main focus is making nutrition as simple to understand as possible and coming up with very practical ways to navigate around the social aspect of food, the emotional relationship with food. And I spend a lot of time focusing on my clients with breaking their own self-limiting beliefs around food and what they believe they're capable of, their emotional attachments to that. So I think nutrition is probably 50% tactical, practical information and 50% emotional, social component and people's relationship with food and their food environment. And that's where a lot of my coaching program is focused, is dealing with that sort of stuff.
Awesome. Well, your introduction is actually a perfect segue into the first question I wanted to kind of lob out there for you guys to toss around a little bit. Nutrition is a complex topic, and if you Google it, or even if you talk to an expert and then you talk to another expert, they're going to say conflicting things. So I'm curious to ask you all, where do you feel like the nutrition industry right now, or nutrition coaching, kind of gets it wrong right now? There's a lot of conversations. Let's talk about where you guys think the myths or where we're missing the mark. And whoever wants to jump in, go ahead.
If you don't mind, yeah, I'll jump in on that. I think where the industry in general misses the mark is kind of taking a fear-based approach with food, right? It's always focusing on what can potentially kill you or ruin your life, as opposed to focusing on the things you need to add to your diet, right? So a lot of the marketing, a lot of the messaging is very fear-based. You see videos of people in grocery stores grabbing oatmeal off the shelf and running down the ingredients and saying how this is going to kill you and it's horrible for you, and the food industry is trying to kill us all. And when you're the average consumer, it's it initially scares you, but then it's not enough to change your behavior. So what happens is you're well, I don't really know if that's true or not. So yeah, I guess I just won't eat oatmeal, but you're not changing anything about your day-to-day habits. So it's fear-based information that's misleading people and it's making them focus on the wrong stuff. And I think on the other side of things, I think a lot of nutrition coaches who are actually preaching very good information sometimes miss the mark on the emotional and social component. They focus more on just hey, you need to eat protein, you need to eat enough fiber, you need to eat fruits and vegetables, which is great, but there's no practical nuance and context about how does the average person apply this in day-to-day life. So I think those are, and you guys let me know if you disagree, I think it's fear-based messaging and then missing the mark on how to actually apply these things to the average person's lifestyle.
What else? Anybody else have some ideas about where we're missing the mark, or big myths out there?
Yeah, I'd have to say I agree, Adam. I agree with what you're saying. I think wanted to kind of add on to that as well is that we overcomplicate it. Being healthy and eating the right things doesn't have to be so complex. And I think we changed the dialogue to make it seem like you have to do a 10-step routine every day in order to be healthy. But there's a lot of foods that I found that you can eat, a lot of things that you can bring in your everyday life and still avoid illness and disease. I eat a fairly simple diet now to avoid, what I face every day and, dealing with my illness and so forth. And I think a lot of people want to complicate it and think they need to create this complex recipe and really twist it up, and it really doesn't need to be that complicated. And I agree with you wholeheartedly that the emotional side of things is huge. There's been lots of research done that what happens to you even in your childhood can influence the way you eat in your adulthood, and that it can actually influence into illness and disease later on in life as well. So I wholeheartedly think we don't focus enough on the emotional side of things.
That's actually not to interrupt you. That's something that I'm really big on with my clients as well. Is like how your childhood traumas can affect your current not only your physical health but your behavioral health, your emotional health. And again, like a lot of the work I do with my clients, like we start off talking about protein and vegetables and things like that, and once you get underneath the hood a bit, you realize there's a lot more of an emotional and social component to this than just fruits and veggies and lean proteins. So yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that up too, because again, it completely misses the mark for people. They think, well, how many times have you guys heard this, right? I know what I'm supposed to do, I'm just not doing it. Right? It's like no one ever hears they need to eat fruits and vegetables or lean protein and they go, wow, that blew my mind. I had no idea. Right? Everyone knows they're supposed to be doing that stuff, but there's these mental blocks they have about applying it to their life. And I think that is going back to the original question, is where there's a huge miss there with the messaging around health nutrition.
Yeah.
I'll add to all of this too. I agree with you both. I think that we need to be aware we're being taken advantage of. And what I mean by that is from like the food industries, what they're trying to navigate salt, sugar, or fat into things to change the way the palate tastes and where to shift you to, from the way the grocery store is designed, the view angle, where things are in proximity, to colors, to even when you're driving down the road. And, everything is strategic to get you to make a decision that most of the time is not in an alignment with your health. So, those of us who are on this side becoming more of advocates for our health, trying to help people make that shift, because when we spin back to the youth idea, is children get into this rhythm of they eat by feel and sight. So they're not thinking like necessarily, oh, I want broccoli because I know that is really good for me. It is once they get the taste of something that feel for them, it becomes a divide for them. And then as parents, I'm sure there's an immense struggle of trying to find that balance between work and life and stressors and doing the best you can. Like, I know we all kind of probably went through something like that. I had to share real quick, I had a lot of resentment towards my dad growing up because when I was older, some health stuff. And growing up, my parents were divorced. He would pick us up, and every 2 weeks, it would be fast food. And it wasn't until I reconnected with him, and I asked him out of curiosity, Dad, why the fast food every 2 weeks? And my dad, in the most humble way, was like, I didn't have much money, but it was what you and your brother wanted. So it's like, again, even like psychologically, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying this guy was just trying to do the best he could and to connect with his kids who he was very distant from. So it's very layered, like Adam was mentioning, like the roots of childhood. And if we don't make that shift to start to become our own advocate, we can stay in those patterns of just unconscious eating and grabbing things on the go and lose self, lose identity, our body, our health. And all of a sudden we're like, I need help. I don't know how to do this on my own. I don't know what's right or wrong, and I'm doing the best that I can. And I'm sure we can all relate in meeting and working with people just like that.
Oh yeah, dude, that's such a great point too, because like you said, like you had that resentment, right? But like your dad wasn't doing anything malicious. He was doing what he thought was right. Mm-hmm. So I think again, it's taking that point of view too, of like, oh hey, like it doesn't mean that you had bad parents because they didn't teach you good nutrition habits. They just doing the best that they could. Mm-hmm. So that's what I really try to work, because a lot of my clients, sometimes they come in with not great relationship with food, not great habits, but they already have kids who are maybe 5, 6, 7. So they've already started to see how they're passing on these habits to their kids. And that's usually a main struggle. How do I start eating healthy when my kids don't want to eat healthy? Because then they want to avoid the other side of the coin, which is causing like a disordered eating pattern with their kid, where they're like, no, this food is bad, this food is healthy. So it is very complex. And I really like to boil it down to and this is kind of like a theme that I use with my clients, is responsibility, not restriction. So focusing on getting aligned with your core values, the lifestyle you want to live, and then making choices based on what is responsibly aligned with those core values and those goals. And it's not about restriction. It's not, I can't eat this. It's just, maybe I'm making a different choice right now. And I think when you can get to that place of, I'm just making this choice now, not the other choice is bad or I'm not allowed to do that. It's like, brushing your teeth, right? Like if you or if you're on a Netflix binge and you fall asleep on the couch and then you wake up and it's like 2 a.m. and you forget to brush your teeth that night, you don't wake up the next day and go, man, I've ruined my teeth. My teeth are all rotten now, and like I've messed up. I'm a horrible human being, right? You're just like, oh, I've got to make sure I brush today, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like that. Your overall behavior is, I brush my teeth every day. If you miss a day once in a while, it's not a big deal. And you got to get into that mindset with nutrition, not have your self-worth attached to your food choices. Making food choices from a place of like I like to use like little sayings with my clients that helps them remember, but thinking of like 80% purpose, 20% pleasure. So 80% of the time, your food has some purpose to it, has some function, it has like a reason to eat it besides it just tastes good. And the other 10-20% of the time, that's when you're making choices based on feel. I feel like eating pizza tonight. I feel like ordering Chinese. And if you can get to that place, I think you can get to a really sustainable lifestyle.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. That is the distinction between feel and what you need in order to thrive and feel good. I think that's sometimes a hard distinction to make, that I find with individuals sort of suffer with, that, you could be eating all the right things, but, you have these highly palatable foods make it hard to make the right decisions. And so you almost get blindsided by that as well. That, I agree in the sense that I don't want anyone to walk away and beat themselves up over what they ate, because there's more worth to that. And a lot of people come from different backgrounds too. They could have some sort of nostalgia with the food that they're eating that, their mom used to make, and it makes them feel a certain way when they eat that. And it brings them sort of a pleasure. And I think also addressing that as well is that, there's some sort of deep-rooted connection you have to that food, and learning to break some of that cycle as well. And I think about it from a standpoint of leading to illness and disease. Those few nights aren't going to break it, but usually illness and disease stems from years and years of work. I mean, you have to think of it kind of your body like you have a row of soldiers, and they're all there to arm you and protect you, but slowly over time, you pluck away one and you pluck away another, and you start to have an issue. And so I think the big thing, like you said, 80 and 20 is an important rule. I also think it's important to understand that I think these marketing companies prey on the 20, which also makes it really hard. They have a habit of wanting to prey on that 20%. And the amount of money that goes into, processed type foods, but it doesn't go into broccoli, it doesn't go into apples, it doesn't go into oranges. I mean, you don't see any marketing campaigns for those. You see all the other stuff. And I think that sometimes it's hard to identify where that 80-20 line comes in, and that can be tricky, and a really tricky, blurry line to figure out.
Yeah, I think just jumping in here a little bit, going back to something that Adam said a little while ago, and a way that I've talked to people about nutrition when I have coached people on nutrition is, if you can just let go of needing to enjoy your food all the time, it kind of solves, because Adam, what I was alluding to that Adam mentioned earlier is, it's not like any of this is a mystery. It's not like any of us don't know that you should be eating a bunch of veggies, and that you got to get the right amount of protein in, and you shouldn't go crazy on fat, but you need some healthy fats. And it's like, this is stuff that almost your average person could probably recite back to you pretty easily. But the problem is that, and like we talked about the marketing industry, they want you to enjoy your food, and they want you to enjoy the food they're pushing out to you, because it's cheaper to make, and there's high profit margins and all this other stuff. But also my methodology of, hey, just stop enjoying your food all the time, it goes against the whole social, emotional, kind of cultural things that we already mentioned that we're fighting against. But so I don't know, it's a really tough industry to help people to make change in.
So one thing that I like to talk about, and I don't know if maybe you guys disagree on this, but I always try to encourage clients to take control of the things that they can control. So I think like once you put it in your head that like the food industry is like, you know, out to get me, it puts you in like that victim seat of like, oh no, I'm walking to the grocery store and all these people are trying to get me, they're trying to poison me. And I just feel like a lot of clients, they don't get a sense of empowerment from that. So when I say 80-20, I don't necessarily mean 80% of the time you have to be eating just lean proteins and just fruits and vegetables. It means 80% of the time there's some control over your total calorie intake, and there is some like protein marker being met. I think for most people, if you can come from that frame of mind, what you will start to realize is that, oh, during my 80% of the time, that doesn't mean that I can't eat pizza. It just means during that 80% of the time, I have to fit that pizza within my calorie goals for the day. The other 20% of the time, I don't have to worry as much about my calorie goals, and I can kind of just eat and be in the moment. And the reason why I talk about that is because I agree with Ethan, like, you don't need to just, I always say to clients, like, every meal doesn't need to be, like, yummy, yummy in your tummy. Like, it doesn't have to be, like, this a really delicious meal, but you can redefine what enjoying a food is. Most people, and this is from my experience, when they are eating, like, off track, they're not actually, like, enjoying their food. They're not going out to these 5-star restaurants and getting these amazing meals. They're eating, like, comfort or convenient-based sort of garbage that they don't even really like. Like, I don't think anyone is, like, pulling up to Dunkin' Donuts to get a wake-up wrap and it's just like, oh, my God, my mouth is just salivating for this, right? It's just more convenient and it's habit. So if you can kind of pull yourself out of that and go, hey, the habits that I'm partaking in that are actually causing my problem aren't even necessarily habits that I enjoy. They're just the current inconvenience that I'm used to. Because there's a trade-off, right? Like, the convenience is I can stop at Starbucks and get that muffin and the latte. That's the convenient part. The inconvenient part is, like, it's expensive and I feel like crap afterwards. So it's just, there's always just a trade-off. The other side of the coin is, hey, I might have to prep my food and pay a little bit more attention to my calories, and maybe it's not going to be, like, super palatable in my mouth, but I'm going to feel way better. So it's, again, it's just like it's a more mindset, like, oh, enjoying my food doesn't just have to do with taste. So when I'm talking to, like, the average person, if I say to them, you don't have to enjoy every meal, it kind of puts them in that state of, like, like, I don't want to do this. I'm not going to enjoy my food. But if you reframe it of, like, hey, listen, you're going to enjoy all these meals, but the enjoyment's going to come from you kept a promise to yourself. You know this meal is good for you. You're going to feel very satiated and full afterwards. You're going to have better energy, better blood sugar control, less cravings. Now they go into it looking for those things, and now then it gives them a little bit more emotionally bought into the process. Because then on day one, when they have a little more energy, they're a little bit more full, they have less sugar cravings, they're like, oh, I enjoyed this. Whereas if they go into the process like, all right, let's suck it up, I don't have to enjoy my meals today, they get to the end of the day and they're like, yeah, I really didn't enjoy any of those meals. And then they don't notice the other things. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Totally. Well, this actually brings up a question that's been on my mind. You each kind of come from a little bit of a different background, a little bit of a different experience. So I'd love to kind of go around the room a little bit and ask you, okay, let's pretend there's a person who's just getting started with their nutrition. Like they haven't done, they've never really focused on it in their life. What's the starting point? Where is it that you tell them to start? And I'll start in my top right screen. So Jennifer, what do you think?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think one of the first things is assessing why. What's their goal? What are they coming at? Are they coming at for wanting to lose weight, feel better, energy, cognitive function? They just feel like shit every day. People are coming at it from different angles. So they might be, depending on what they're coming from. I have to bring up my sister as an example because she's seen me work in this industry and kind of work through, dealing with a lot of disease and illness. And, she came to me a couple of years ago and she said the same thing. And she said, I just don't feel good. Digestionally, I don't feel good. Mentally, I don't feel good every day. But what do? I don't know what's going on. And so one of the first few things I said, let's just baseline. Let's clean it up. Let's start from the beginning. Let's start from scratch. Let's not add all this fancy stuff. Let's clean it up. Let's just get you developing good habits. And I think that's some of the beginning things to do, because she wanted to start working on stuff for her digestion and taking different supplements and so forth. And I told her, that's good. That's stuff we can add on later on once we've figured out. But it's so hard to find out what's going on if we haven't even just addressed the baseline and cleaned it up, because we can't. It's hard. I feel like, a lot of times when we want to lose weight, or, we want to work on our digestion health, we feel bloated, we have headaches all the time. It's hard to identify what the problem is and what's going on until we kind of sort of clean it up a little bit. We sort of start with the baseline. Then we can start saying, let's figure out what's going on here. What are the things that could be, influencing you every day? And so starting with that, I think, helps, and then building upon that, and then moving forward and saying, okay, now we've made some groundwork. Now you've sort of developed a lot of these habits, and we can figure out how we need to proceed with you.
When you say clean it up, what do you mean?
So I think eating a lot of identifying kind of where your weaknesses might be and what you're eating too. So are you eating from an emotional standpoint? And I think going way back is one of the main questions I think I ask is, when did you last feel good? When is the last time you actually said, I felt great? And what did your life look like then? What were you eating? What was going on at that time? And so a lot of that is bringing it back to asking that question, because I think a lot of times people don't know when's the last time they felt good. And so then I start making those transitional changes. All right, let's go back to eating what you were eating at that time period. What did you brought on since then? What have your habits done since then? Are you eating out all the time? Do you not know what you're eating? Let's figure out what you're eating. Let's start going to the store and looking at what you're eating. Let's taking a look at the foods that you're bringing into your home. And let's eat more whole-based foods. And then we kind of identify what's going on here. It doesn't have to be horrible. It doesn't have to be just chicken and rice and potato and broccoli. But let's bring on things that have simple ingredients, and then we can build upon that. And then we can bring on some of the more fun things. And I think simplifying it and bringing on those simple ingredients and simple foods can help sort of build onto a better foundation.
Awesome. Thank you. Sean, okay, new person, just getting started with their nutrition. Where do you start with them?
Yeah, when I hear Jennifer's, I go that deep too, but I also feel like if it's not simple, it's going to make it challenging for them to walk away with feeling like they have something they can immediately grasp, implement, and start to see progress in. I've never met a person who needs nutrition help, just like you're mentioning, someone who is coming to a person for help, whether they want to lose weight, like whatever their specific goal is, feel better, who's eating enough protein. And this is the easy place to start, because a lot of issues come out of protein, or not eating enough protein.
If we lose him,
If you're not eating enough protein, you're likely going to be
right in the middle of
overeating in the wrong areas. You're going to be likely having cravings later in the evening that obviously are going to spin you in the wrong direction, and so on. I don't, depending on the person, like I think about coaching people in terms of like the basics, intermediate, and advancement. So it can kind of swing on this pendulum depending on what I perceive and what I read in the room. But that particular habit and teaching them about that and the importance of that, not just from a keeping lean tissue, but filling your stomach, and what that does for eliminating other things. Like Adam mentioned about like, people can have this restriction mentality, like, oh, I'm just going to have to eat salads all the time. And it's really unrealistic for healthy eating. Like, you don't need to eat a salad to be a healthy individual. So when it becomes about protein, I'm not even talking about taking anything away or removing anything. It is this focus on this thing that, again, most people that come to us for help, they're probably not even starting the day with either enough protein or protein at all, and what that does to their system and where that sends them the path down. So that's typically where I'll start, see a lot of success. And from that success, it's very easy, I found, to create the ripple effect of whether we're going to layer, we're going to habit stack, we got to focus here for a little bit and kind of fine tune it. And then the evolution just kind of can grow from there depending on the individual.
Awesome. do you, when you're talking about protein specifically for them, do you have a specific kind of standard, where do they need to be with that protein? Just to bring a little bit of context to that.
Great. Thank you for narrowing it. So ideally, obviously, if you're in a environment where you're resistance training, it's my belief to work up to a pound per gram of body weight. Now, a lot of people that can be challenging. And, I'll use a client of mine, a woman in her 60s, and her body weight, around 135. And when we got a pulse of where she was starting at protein, it was like maybe 65 to 70 grams. So to think of closing that gap was really like heavy for her. So, that first month, it wasn't about going from 70 and almost doubling it. It was, let's get closer towards 100, and we're going to make our strides to get there. So, and that probably would effectively be her lean body mass. You take her body weight minus her body fat, or her body fat percentage. So that to me is like a really healthy target, or about 80% of a person's weight. So I'm okay with that. I really like to move people up more towards their total body weight. Depends on the person, but those numbers, are always helpful, whether it's 80% or 100% of your body weight in protein.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big struggles. I'm glad you mentioned, because if a person is coming in and they're 285 pounds, but they're 5'4", and their lean mass is 113 pounds, that's a challenge with that amount of protein. So I'm really glad that you we'll take some of that into the. All right, Adam, new person, never worked on their nutrition before. Where are you going to start with them?
I will preface this by saying I agree with both Sean and Jennifer that it's very individualized. Obviously, you have to assess their starting point and their goals. But again, broad stroke, someone's coming to me, they've never worked on their nutrition before, which probably means their main goal is some sort of body composition change, right? Because anyone who's in shape to begin with, they've probably done some work on their nutrition before, right? But broad stroke, the main thing I have people focus on when they first start is 3 to 4 balanced meals a day. And when I say a balanced meal, it means there is a lean protein, there is a form of produce, and there is a carb. And I don't even have them necessarily hit certain grams or even weigh and measure yet. It's just building that plate at least 3 times a day. And the reason why is because I find that some of the big habits I see people that are coming in with these habits that are just across the board are a tendency to skip meals, being very busy throughout the day and food is an afterthought. They're usually grazing or snacking throughout the day, generally not on protein, so they're not eating enough protein. And a lot of them are just skipping breakfast or just having coffee first thing in the morning. And these 3 things are all going to lead to higher sugar cravings, more likelihood to binge at night, more likelihood to go off track on the weekends. So before we even get into calorie goals, protein goals, any of that stuff, I think if you're just focusing on 3 balanced meals a day, that again, there's a lean protein, right? There's a form of carbohydrate. There is at least a produce, meaning a fruit or a vegetable, right? And we start there. I think you do that for a week, you're going to notice across the board, better hunger control, less sugar cravings, better energy throughout the day, more fullness. And that's where I would start someone, is really focusing on how do I get at least 3 actual meals a day, not snacks, not grazing, not just a slim fast shake, 3 actual meals. And then from there, I usually provide, I have a food group cheat sheet. I have a way to build out your meals and learning how to do that. If anyone here is listening to this, those are all actual free resources that I have on my website. Cheap plug there. But if you want to go to badgerstrength.com, there's the food group cheat sheet and the meal template builder on there totally for free. You could check that out too. But 3 balanced meals, ingrain that into your head. Meals, not snacks, and it's a game changer.
So this may have been layered into your response, Adam, but I actually I'm kind of caught off that none of you guys went straight to calories right off of the bat. And I guess why not? How do calories factor in? I know, and again, you guys all have a little bit of a unique perspective coming into this, so I'm kind of just curious to toss that into the group.
So the reason why I didn't go straight to calories is because usually to set a calorie goal, what I have a client do first is establish what their current baseline calories are. So that would be have them track food for a week without any coaching, right? So they just eat normally, and then we see what are their protein numbers, what are their average calorie intake. I do find for a lot of people, if they've never tried, again, we're doing based off like they've never worked on. I think calories are the most important thing, but if you can start to get them to have a non-number based thing to focus on, that automatically, like as a default, controls their calories a bit. It gives them a hope that they don't have to like track for the rest of their life. I think sometimes when you start people with tracking their calories, again, assuming that they've never done this before, they're gonna learn a ton. And I always at some point have my clients track their calories. But I think sometimes when you start there with people, it automatically puts them into like this, oh man, I didn't know that have that many calories. Like, and they start getting a little stressed out about it. But if you're
Obsessive
just like,
almost.
yeah, a little obsessive. So if you go straight to like, for me, try these meals, choose from these food groups. Now they're not thinking about like, I got to do this extra thing. I got to check this app. I got to start looking at nutrition labels. It's like, it's very, very simple. So that's why I start there, is to avoid like the association of, oh, my results are determined by these numbers. It's more like, oh, my results are determined by these habits and these choices that I make.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll add to it. And I know, Jen, you probably have insight here too, is, if a person doesn't have the basics down, we're just jumping right to the advanced. Like, I don't think that sets them up for success, regardless if, they're going to track for a little bit. Like Adam mentioned, it's going to put these associations around food, around the hassle of it, where I like to approach it from the mentality, without even kind of communicating this unless they ask, that we're going to spend some time kind of building around the basics, however long that could be, a 3-month period, somewhere in this stage, and present it as a question, in terms of if they want to do that, are they open to that? If they want to skyrocket the results even faster, and they need to know their maintenance calories. They need to know, like, so then they can start, because they've got some groundwork in understanding protein and balance and all these like simple terms and ways that they can navigate before tracking. We can bring them in now to say, okay, now let's understand, if you eat this amount in a week, you're going to stay the same, all things considered. You go above this in a surplus, we're going to start to gain weight in an unwanted way. We go below, we're going to start to lose weight, and how we're going to approach that. And again, a healthy deficit, introducing that. And then forward framing, like, I'm not going to keep you in this deficit for life either. Like, I keep people in a deficit for, anywhere from 3 to 4 months, and then it's back to maintenance. So the hormonal system doesn't just get jacked up. I think that's important too, where you can't just live in that forever to just lose, and keep them, again, depending on the goal. If it's 80 pounds, you better prepare for a year plus long, process to do it the right way. So, I view it from lay a foundation, and then once they've got some momentum going, now we can talk about, okay, we could talk about speeding this up, identifying this, because that's a whole new learning curve to plug in food. And it's also work on people's part, which, again, if you're more committed, I mean, my goodness, it's not difficult to track and kind of have awareness around your food. But if someone's coming for help, again, that could be very overwhelming. That could become another layer of, this is impossible. And that's not what we're trying to do with people with nutrition. We're trying to identify these struggles. We're trying to help them on a path, sustainability, the whole kind of theme of what, we're all here for. And what kind of the premise is like busy adults and sustainable nutrition habits. And, you track, when you get to that period and you track and you understand and you start paying attention to, a food label, and you start to understand, even at a deep level. I've been working with a client for a year, where if you do have a surplus of a day, whatever it is, Super Bowl weekend, how you can strategically offset the next couple of days so your week is impeded. Like, that's like very advanced level stuff. But when they see that sort of you can't start there. You start there, man. That is just so much info and overwhelm for people, and I don't know if that's going to be something that is sustainable for them for the long term. And that's just my opinion. I mean, I'm open to hearing if there's different thoughts on that. Jen, I don't know what you were going to share on that, but
Yeah, and I will preface, a lot of my work comes from a research standpoint, so I'm looking at not necessarily client interface. So a lot of my advice is looking at it from cellular standpoint, what's going on in the body, how is our body interacting with the things that we're eating. So a lot of the advice I give isn't always tailored towards maybe the average day individual, but I can say that starting with focusing on calories, I have found that individuals end up making shortcuts. And I say that because we stop focusing on the quality of the food and the nutrient density of the food because we're so focused on meeting a number, and we're not focused on what the food is providing us other than carbs, protein, fat. Although I do agree that focusing on protein and making your goal protein oriented and building around a protein diet is incredibly important. And I think about that from focus on the essential amino acids in your body and what that does for the cells in your body and what that does from you in a longevity standpoint. And so I think focusing on calories takes away from what you could bring into your diet. And so, from a standpoint of choosing low-fat yogurt versus full, whole, satisfying yogurt. And I think a lot of times when individuals focus on meeting that number and focusing on the calories, they don't end up making satisfying choices. And I really like your point, Adam, when you talk about the 3 meals a day. I think in that standpoint, that puts people in the mindset of, I need to choose quality foods instead of choosing low-calorie foods and having to eat those 6 times a day because I'm hungry and I never felt satisfied when I ate those things. I'm choosing foods that are satisfying. They keep me full, they get me to the next meal, and I feel good until then. I'm not dreaming about food. I'm not thinking about dinner. I'm feeling good each meal that I get to because I feel satisfied. And it changes the way you think. It changes your brain chemistry. It changes the way you interact, your mood, all of that. So these shortcuts will almost determine how we're going to make choices throughout the day.
Yeah, I agree with that too, and I like the point that you made too with numbers is people have a tendency to try to hack numbers, right? So same thing with like the scale. If people know they have a weigh-in on Friday, they're gonna like, oh, if I sweat a little more Thursday, or if I eat a little less Thursday, like the number's gonna go down, and people have just this tendency to try to hack numbers. But I think again it's so nuanced. I think like the graduation process would be you start with those baseline habits, you start with those balanced meals, plate building, then you can graduate to like calorie protein goals, and then if you wanted to, you could go into like calorie cycling, like Sean was talking about, or into macro tracking. But there's an ascension process, and a lot of times one place where a lot of nutrition coaching programs miss the boat is they just take anyone in and they go straight to the numbers, right? Like someone off the street, they sign up for this program, they pay, whatever, $75, they get their macros. You know how many times I've coached a client and they've done they've tracked macros 8 different 8-week cycles. So we're talking, they've spent 64 weeks of their life tracking macros, and they still don't understand why macros even lead to weight loss. Like they don't even understand why they're tracking them in the first place. So I think like reversing that process and going, hey, this is going to take a little bit more attention and a little bit more individualization. But like if you're following that template of protein, produce, carb, when you go to eat a slice of pizza, instead of going, how many calories is this, all that mental math, you just start thinking like, well, there's no protein, there's no produce here, it's kind of a carb, but it's a little, like, it starts to reframe your mind. If you go out to eat, instead of thinking like, how do I track this meal, you just start thinking of, oh, I got to order a protein, produce, carb, and it really starts forming this new habit of a way to look at food. And then you can have the conversation of, one conversation I have with my clients is like, if you're doing 3 meals a day, that's 21 meals every week. That's, what's that, 84 meals every month. Yeah, if you have 1 or 2 that don't fit that template each week, it's not the end of the world. Like, it's such a small percentage. So then you can kind of play with those numbers a little bit. Like, hey, listen, you're going to eat 21 times this week. Can I get 19 of them to follow this template? And then 1 or 2 of them, if you want to just have a bagel and a coffee, like that's whatever. It's fine.
I love that. Now we're working in macros. You guys are kind of talking quite a bit about the role of macros and all those things. So this is something I've thought about a lot. Is the fad type. I don't want to give a negative connotation to anything, but there are some diets out there that really focus on either having a ton of one macronutrient and not a lot of another macronutrient. And when I think about that as it relates to health, it makes me a little worried. And you all are experts. I'm just curious. What do you guys think about, a diet that might recommend that you almost completely eliminate a macronutrient? And every generation has a different one. Like our grandparents or parents was like low fat, no fat, right? And then it was like keto was like all the fat and like no carbs. So there's been all these different versions of this, and I'd love to just toss it out there for the group. What do you guys think about those?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd love to jump on this, but I think those fad diets too, that you want to focus on each individual micronutrient. I think sometimes they come at them with good intention. Someone might have had a different experience and they felt the need to jump on that, but it's so individualized to the person. Especially, low carb might work for somebody, but when you talk about females and you look at their hormonal cycle, it's going to be so much different. And so I think a lot of times we get very hooked on protein, carbs, and fats, but we don't look at it from a micronutrient or nutritional deficiency manner. And so when we eliminate a category, there's a lot of opportunity for deficiencies to occur. And so I look at it from that standpoint that each one of these hold value and they hold merit. Now, depending on what your goals are or depending on what's going on in your body, each one might play a different factor. So I think it's important to realize there's a balance between these, and if there's a balance depending on what you need. And I love your point where, in our parents' day and age, it was, fats are bad. And I think there's almost this trend now that carbs are bad and that protein for some reason is the only thing that can be preserved. But all of these things play such a key factor among each other. And it's going to depend on what you're doing.
I have a thought on what you said, but I want to hear how these guys respond before I come back to it.
I think if you're explaining it to clients, and what I try to do is I explain this to them. I inevitably get asked about macros. If you truly understand like the principle that your protein needs to be met, if you notice like Jen said, there's really never been a diet, unless you're maybe talking about like a vegan diet, which is like even vegans need to eat enough protein. It's still very important for them to hit their protein, but like there's never been a war on protein, and I feel like that's like the next thing. Like there's going to be some sort of like Instagram fad where people are saying you can like be healthy and lean without eating protein, which will be like the one word pretty much everyone will say that's dumb, don't do that. But if you understand the basics around nutrition, your proteins, carbs, and fats, the reason why they're called macronutrients is because these are the only nutrients that you intake that contain calories. They're what lead to your calorie load, right? So if you understand that, the whole purpose of tracking macros in the first place is to control your total calories. So when you eliminate carbs or you eliminate fats, what you're doing is you're controlling the calories, but you notice the protein never gets eliminated. So again, to come back to what I was saying before is you just need a protein target and a calorie range and you're fine. And then you start to learn, like Sean was saying, you can manipulate things a little bit in a good way by going, oh, hey, this meal is a little high in fat. So maybe on this one meal, I'm going to moderate my carbs down. So an example that I use is like if I'm having a ribeye steak, I'm probably going to have just veggies with it because it's so high in fat. Whereas if I have like a sirloin steak, I might have rice or potato with it because it's low in fat. So it kind of, there's never a reason to fully eliminate a macro. And like Jen said, it's probably more detrimental to eliminate one than than if you just kept all three in play. But if you just understand the principle that it's not the macro that's causing any weight loss or weight gain, it's total calories, then it's like saying, hey, I'm only going to spend $500 a month, but I'm only going to use $20 bills, right? Like if I'm only using $20 bills, I'm good. But 20 like $500 in all 20s or $500 in all 10s, it's still $500, right? There's no bill that's evil and bill that's good, and that's what your macronutrients are. They're just different bills that make up this total amount of calories, if that makes sense.
Yeah, then just a layer, I think sustainability. Like you have to be realistic with yourself, and if you want to experiment, like if people are set on this and they want to go like the all meat diet or the carnivore, You know, hopefully they're educated if they're not coming to, you know, a nutrition coach and getting, you know, in terms of information. I just don't foresee or haven't seen those things with people around me who've tried specific elimination or like singular focused diets. I haven't seen it stick with them for the long haul, whether that's lifestyle, whether that's, you know, travel, whether that's, you know, things that they want to regularly bring into their lifestyle. They're outliers, you know, they're like on the edges of the things. And like Adam was talking about with the macros, like each has a purpose too. Purpose beyond what I think we give them credit for, and really dig into your brain health, your eyes, your skin, your bones. Like we need some degree of it all, and getting a little bit more control, a little bit more discipline on what we say yes to, what we say no to, what we say more yeses to, or more no's to, things of that nature. We identify where we're struggling, and we start to make little strides. Again, the theme here from the very beginning is not perfection. That's ridiculous. It's moving up this scheme of like 80-20 was presented. I don't know about you guys. When I meet people and they tell me their nutrition's good, their version of good is not really good. And that's an interesting
50-50.
identification of like when someone, oh, I ate pretty well. It's like, okay, great. Like, you know, roll that out for me. And then without judgment, you just get a lay of the land and you're like, okay, that's what this individual views as good, because they end their day with a protein, carb, and a veggie, but the lunch and the breakfast were just awful and full of sugar and all these things, like, because I ended there, you know. So it's interesting how we've conditioned ourselves, and even kind of the soft lies we tell ourselves, where you know, going back to the original, I think finding a healthy balance and a sustainable approach for your nutrition is ultimately key for everybody's success, and that is going to be a little particular to each person too.
So bringing it back around to what Jennifer said, because she is coming from a background of healing a dysfunction in her body, you know, working with a disease. And there are going to be people that we work with who do have actual like medical health issues that they're going to have to deal with it, and the basics don't always perfectly apply to them. You know, someone who maybe has an autoimmune disease, or someone who has an allergy to something like gluten, or someone, I'll even say maybe it's a lifestyle choice, or something like you mentioned, vegan was mentioned here, vegetarianism is another one. You know, how do you work with folks like that are a little bit outside of our normal baseline population to like help them with what their version of basics might look like?
Yeah, I'll go first. Like, I work with a woman who has, she's 60, rheumatoid arthritis, and then an underlying thyroid issue that's been going on for a while. And when she initially came to me, I presented, you know, a dietitian route, like that might be the best route suited for you with what's going on. And she was like, nope, you know, I accept that, you know, you're not that in terms of like the licensed medical professional, and we keep realistic expectations, knowing that that's always an underlying tone. So if we have an off month, if we have, you know, in terms of metrics, you know, using the InBody as a scan in terms of part of the, you know, measurement that this person wants to track across time with the habits we're focusing on, plus blood work. You know, like this person's highly in tune with these things. They help along the way, and we have discussions about them, and just kind of let her share. But like Adam said in the beginning too, a big proponent for controlling what we can control. Some things are unfortunately going to be a little bit out of our control. We can't control, you know, this woman in terms of a thyroid flare-up that she doesn't know about until she's a couple weeks into it, and her body's having, you know, these subset of experiences. You know, so that's, I think, just being very open and having a very open dialogue and realistic expectations of what's always at play, and not setting ourselves up for failure for unrealistic expectations while we're working through something serious like a medical condition.
I have a client right now who has Hashimoto's, and you know, so there's a lot of foods that sort of trigger it. And Jen, I'm sure you would agree with this too. Is like, you know, things like autoimmune diseases and Hashimoto's, like at their root, they're metabolic disorders. Like it's a metabolic disorder, and generally, like a thyroid disorder or a metabolic disorder is from some form of stress. And a lot of times when clients hear that, they automatically think that you're telling them that's their fault. And that's not what you're saying. But like, if you can get to that root cause, it really comes down to managing stress and healing your metabolism. And what are the basics around that? It's the same basics you would probably teach someone who's trying to lose weight. You got to get better sleep. You got to have better boundaries in your life around your schedule and like the people you're letting into your life, like more of that mindset stuff. You probably should eat less ingredient style foods. And I, with this one particular client too, like she gave me like a list of foods that she couldn't eat, and she had this list of foods that she could eat, but her overall goal was she wanted to change her body composition. And I'm like, yeah, I get that, but we got to heal your metabolism first. We got to heal your thyroid first before we start worrying about like, you know, getting more definition in our triceps. Like you have this underlying thing that's a metabolic disorder, and you're living, and then you dig in, right? And you start digging in. It's like, oh, you went through these, and this isn't her particular situation. I'm just using these examples. Like, oh, you had a major death in your family. Oh, you had a big job transition. Oh, you went through a divorce. Oh, you're there's something wrong with your kid, or your kid's going through a rough time. And you have to just get to this root cause of like, the reason why you're having these reactions to foods is because you're already in a stressed fight or flight state, and these foods are triggering your body to like shut down that part, right? So if you can understand that concept, now we can step back and go, oh, I don't have to live my life in a bubble and that like everything's going to poison me out of fear. I get out of that victim state and go more into the control state and go, I need to take control of my stress, my sleep, making sure I'm healing my metabolism. I'm eating enough calories. I'm not restricting calories. I'm getting enough protein. I'm getting enough fiber. I'm getting enough carbs, because we don't want to cut those out. So I think that's an important aspect to acknowledge, is that any of those underlying conditions, a lot of them are metabolic, behavior-based conditions, which means you have power, you have control to change them. And it gives you a better mindset going to the process, where I find, as you guys both like come from, like you've gone through the schooling of like that, more of a medical side of things. And you said, Sean, that like you didn't like the way that stuff was presented. And I agree with you, because a lot of times what happens, you go there, they say, you have Hashimoto's, you have this, here's a list of foods you can't eat, see you in a month, right? It's like, like the first question, right? There's no emotional component there of, well, why do you, like, what is going on in your life that's caused your body to literally react this way? Because your body is doing this because it's shutting down, because it thinks you're in constant danger. And that's a result of stress.
Yeah, I like both of your points on it, and I will say that autoimmune disease, I like to say really any disease, is a form of dysfunction in the body. It's some sort of dysfunction that's going on, and it's very tricky. Each approach to each autoimmune disease or illness is going to have a completely different path. And what I think even deeper, what it goes down to is mitochondrial dysfunction. Your cells are not happy. And why are your cells not happy? And I think you have to sort of examine this timeline. And a lot of times it's not something they did last year or the year before or the year before. We gotta go way back. Sometimes even back to being born and being nursed. I mean, there's a lot of things that develop, and sort of, my analogy earlier, you have to think about it like soldiers. Slowly, each soldier was sort of chipped away until you didn't have the defense system to be able to handle things, an intolerance to dairy, or an intolerance to nightshades, or an intolerance to a myriad of different things that a lot of different autoimmune disorders face. And I think examining what's going on at a cellular level, what's going on within the gut, and even before all of that, and I know a lot of times people who face autoimmune disease have problems with hair, they have problems with skin, they have problems with cognitive function, weight loss, weight gain. And so a lot of times those will be the goals initially. And I completely agree, Adam, what you mentioned earlier about, she wants to lose weight, she wants to change her body composition. There's a whole host of inflammation that's going on. And I think when you look at the cell, when this dysfunction is going on, there's a host of oxidative stress. So your body is not even going to think about losing weight. It's not even going to think about fertility. It's not going to think about your hair. It's not going to think about your skin. a lot of times when an autoimmune disease occurs, it's when it's what your body is trying to do to preserve itself. Your body will do anything it can to survive. So when you have an autoimmune disease that occurs, your body is trying to preserve you and keep you alive. And so looking at this from a cellular level, what kind of my thought process goes on and sort of my research is, why is your cells unhappy? And a lot of times it stems down to nutritional deficiencies and your microbiome. And that's a very base level. Now there's all the other factors that come along with it. Stress definitely influences the amount of mineral intake you keep and discard. Trauma can influence those things. Those are huge factors that I think completely get overlooked. But also the quality of your foods. Prior to my diagnosis, I was quite shocked initially, because I was somebody who had a very, depth concept of my macronutrients. I exercised, I played sports, I didn't push myself too hard, but I didn't push myself too little. So it was quite shocking. And I had to do a heavy examination of the different things and deficiencies. What am I lacking? Why for somebody who eats the way I do, why do I have such little nutrient and mineral density in my body? And I wholeheartedly agree, stress is a huge factor in that. And that's something that I definitely examined. I had a pretty hard injury that happened the year before. I was actually fully diagnosed with my autoimmune disease. And the injury took a toll on my body, and it was hard. And so when I look at, a lot of times what's going on and why this dysfunction occurs, a lot of times it's deficiency. And that's why, when we talked about calories earlier, I think it's important not to always focus on the calories, but the quality of those calories. Because you can meet your macronutrients by eating not so great stuff. But the quality of those foods is going to be the difference between feeling good and feeling optimal. And I think a lot of times people don't know what optimal feels like because they've been so bogged down by dysfunction. And I think a lot of times we don't even know that we're facing dysfunction every day because we don't know what good feels like because we've never felt it.
Yeah, I think too. Sorry, Ethan. I was going to say to your point, Jen, is that you were someone who was very active and ate healthy, and you're like, well, how's that possible? And I've worked with a lot of clients. The one who I referenced included, they came in and they are working out. They are eating relatively healthy. They are like in good shape. She wants to be more defined, but she's not someone who's like overweight by any means. And a lot of times the other end of the spectrum of the go grind, work athlete, working out a lot, eating a low calorie diet, that can also lead, that's dysfunction too, because that can lead to added stress, right? I've worked with a lot of clients before who have like these symptoms like cold hands and feet, no morning appetite, losing their menstrual cycles off, like all poor sleep. And they're not overweight people. And they're like, I don't get it. I work out 6 days a week. I do 2 spin classes on Saturdays. I eat, 1,300 calories a day. How am I unhealthy? I'm like, because of everything you just said. That's why. You're on the other end of the spectrum where you're overdoing it. To use myself as an example, I did like a mineral analysis on my body, and I've been working out since I was 15 years old. I'm 33 now. I eat healthy. I eat a protein-based diet. I have a very good like 80-20, 90-10 rotation with food. I try to prioritize sleep. And my mineral analysis came back, and I was like deficient in so many things. And the root of it was my stress level was so high from the last few years of starting my own business, going through the cycles of entrepreneurship. I also, childhood trauma, like grew up didn't come from any money, like grew up with a bad relationship with finances. And of course, what I go is to go start my own fucking business. I caused this really, I had to really do some deep work and confront a lot of underlying self-limiting beliefs that were causing my body to be in a constant fight or flight state. So I was intaking enough protein, I was intaking high quality foods, but my body was just like flushing them straight out. It wasn't holding on to anything because it was so using all of its resources just to keep me alive because I was operating like in fight or flight. So some things that helped me, it wasn't just about getting a magnesium supplement or eating more fruits. It was, I had to start doing like hard boundaries and setting breaks from work, I had to start doing some breath work and meditation in the week, during the week, like in the mornings. Probably really prioritizing sleep, like starting to go to therapy. Like these things, I couldn't just go, yeah, I'll order some supplements that's going to fix this. I had to get to that root cause, what was causing that stress. So yeah, it doesn't, when you hear an autoimmune disease, a lot of times people think of, oh, well, someone who's living an unhealthy lifestyle, they're overweight, they're eating processed foods. No, it can happen to someone who's too active, and they're using exercise as a way to not deal with these underlying issues. They're just like, I'm going to work out harder, I'm going to diet harder, I'm going to get that perfect body to offset these insecurities that I have. And again, it's what's the core root there? Stress, self-worth, emotional support. So that's where I think a lot of the fitness industry misses the mark. Is like it's always talking about these tactical things, and there's this huge baseline of the hierarchy of needs where it's like your like emotional health needs to be in a good spot before you're worrying about like how many grams of fat should I eat today.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, and I won't sidetrack us too much with that, but I call myself a performance coach. Anyone who comes and does a consultation with me who is strictly only wants to talk about their body composition, I actually won't work with them.
Yeah.
I won't allow, that's fine for somebody else, and I don't judge anyone else who does that type of work, but for me and my mindset and my own actual wellness, it really I find it to be more stressful. And I also have found is when we work on all the things you talked about, when we talk about de-stressing in every area of your life, and we work on performance goals that are actually good for you and your overall wellness, including your physical performance, then the body composition usually just comes along anyway. So that's, I'm so glad that you said that. Thank you for that. And I wanted to come all the way back to something that Jennifer said a little while ago, because it is kind of like a hot topic right now in our industry, is gut health. You mentioned microbiome and gut health. And I'm kind of curious, are any of you guys kind of focusing on that as a part of your work now? Is that something that you guys bring in very much, or is that still jumping to the advanced sexy stuff and getting past the basics?
I in my experience, I haven't really done too much work with like the microbiome and stuff like that. My wife is a nutritional therapy practitioner, so she's a little more knowledgeable on that stuff. She works with clients who are more on their hormonal health and gets into the weeds with their minerals and stuff. I don't think I've ever run into a client in like 10 years where it was like, oh, you did everything 100% consistent, and it was your gut microbiome the whole time. It's like, I think that is more of a side effect of behavior. So I think still, yeah, if you go back to the basics, you change the behavior, you manage stress, you clean up your diet, you eat enough protein, and I think that stuff kind of works itself out. That's my opinion. I have no research to back that up. I just don't have. I've just never come across someone who was like, man, I don't get it. You've been like 100% consistent for 9 months straight and nothing has changed. It's got to be the gut microbiome. It's usually like, that's like, I don't know, like the tip of the iceberg type of stuff, in my experience.
Yeah. I mean, I'll share a personal experience here that, obviously our own experiences come into these to play to help coach people through this as well. Obviously, Jen, with your autoimmune, I mean, that becomes a big player in terms of how we can help people, right? Obviously we're all, I would imagine, more in the 80, 90, percent eating clean, paying attention. We've done a lot of things. We've experimented. I went through a period where I was experiencing some GI issues and ran some tests, saw some doctors through the VA, and nothing that was coming back was giving me helpful information. And it wasn't until, again, through some trial and error, I was like, let me eliminate vegetables. It sounds wild. Eliminate vegetables for a time period, because the vegetables that I was consuming were disrupting my GI and causing things, obviously, that I didn't want to occur. So eliminating them, those symptoms rather quickly went away. And that was interesting. Now, would I go tell everybody to eliminate vegetables? No. That was my unique experience, and I've since brought them back in, just in a different dose than I was doing before. Other experiences that could really kind of play a role in the gut are like too much fat in the system that can really disrupt the GI as well. stress, obviously, and maybe even giving a period. These aren't things that I particularly would coach people through that I just have experience with. Having a period where you give yourself a break from eating too, and again, I'm not a proponent or like go fast or don't fast or XYZ, but giving the gut a break, because again, depending on a person's history and what they were continually putting through the pipeline, if that's not healthy food and greasy food or like just like bad food, like there's wear and tear in there for a while. I mean, that system's strong, but a cleansing out period could probably be beneficial before, obviously, okay, the gut biome is the serious thing we need to go after. But those are just some thoughts I have from personal experience and through conversations with people, not particularly coaching people through them, though.
Yeah, Ethan, you mentioned something earlier that I really resonate with, is that when people focus on their health, a lot of times the body composition things come with that. And I think about that sometimes when choosing, high quality sources and choosing good foods, good for you. A lot of times the body composition stuff just comes with it. And, that's why I think a lot of times people are doing those things. But a lot of times there's this dysfunction. And I think there's this two different sides of it where, you could start eating well and doing all these things and you change your life before you start facing these cellular dysfunction that's going on, before you sort of turn the switch. And, that's good. And then we can catch that beforehand. And we may have never known what the possibilities could have been. Then there's this other side where the switch has been turned and autoimmune disease. And now maybe they're predispositioned for Alzheimer's, dementia, different things later on in life that they may have never even thought they might have been exposed to. And so the gut microbiome, to me, is a really important indicator of what your life may look like 10 years down the road, what your life may look like 20 years down the road, 30 years down the road, what your child's life might look like down the road as well. And so it's an indicator, and it's a great predictive tool to be able to identify somebody's current state and their future state. And, I have to speak because I don't work necessarily directly with clients. I do a lot of more on the research side of things. So, but I have to use it on a sort of personal standpoint. When my sister came to me, I had this sneaky suspicion because she was doing a lot of good things in her life. She was eating really well. And I thought, what's going on? There's something we're not catching here. I ran a GI panel. If anybody's ever had to do a GI panel, they're awful, but you do them because an amazing insight of what's going on in your body. And I had this sneaky suspicion she had problems with candida. When we look at it, her candida was off the charts. That was controlling. Candida can do things like control what you crave, what you want to eat. It can control your mood. When your gut microbiome is off, it can change the way you feel about everyday life. It can change the way your skin looks even. Because I started to notice, I thought my sister has great skin. She's always had great skin. But why is she having problems with this? This seems odd. And, when we did the GI panel, and I've now, seen a couple different GI panels and then looked at it to research, I started looking at things like her pancreatic enzymes, was looking at the enzymes in her stomach. Why is she having a hard time digesting vegetable fiber? What's going on? She should be able to take these in. Vegetables shouldn't be what knocks you out. We should be resilient enough to be able to deal with these things. Now, there's different ways to live optimally. There's different ways to obtain your nutrients, whether you obtain more your nutrients from fruit or vegetables. That's a different kind of story. But when you look at your microbiome and what you can identify of why you're not processing what you're taking in well, it's a key indicator of whether the foods you take in are even going to do anything. And so looking at that, I started to look too. She was excreting her short chain fatty acids. Now we got to get some energy. You're so tired. You don't have anything that's really keeping you sustained. And I recommend things like taking MCT. Let's get some medium chain fatty acids in your body. So we started looking at just different things, but it was a really good indicator. And I think a lot of people would be surprised if they did a GI panel, what their future could look like. And I think that's, so I look at it from that standpoint of the microbiome is an amazing tool for us to sort of see that. And a lot of times too, when you look at different illnesses and disease, there's different markers that are completely flagged right off the bat. And so, from that standpoint, for me, I think it should be used as a tool and a great predictive tool to prevent some of these things to happen. Before I even was diagnosed with my autoimmune disease, I remember I went in 3 years before. Something was not right. I felt wrong. I felt bloated. I had a lot of brain fog, getting headaches. Something's, not right. They did blood panels, but they never really asked me what I was eating. They didn't do a GI panel. They didn't even run extensive enough tests. They looked at it and said, well, you might be just feeling kind of off. 3 years later, I was diagnosed, and I thought that could have been the time. That could have been the time to find it. So I think it's a good indicator. The microbiome is a good indicator to hopefully, at some point, once we've, that's why I said at the beginning, kind of cleaning it up. But at some point, then it might be able to help us fine tune and live optimally.
Awesome. I love it. Well, as we are kind of coming towards the end of the conversation, I would love to kind of put out there, were there things that you hoped I would ask you about? Were there topics that you were ready to work into the conversation? Maybe, I don't know, I probably promised the audience something that we were going to talk about that I didn't even bring up as a question. Anything you guys want to kind of throw out for the group?
Do you mind if I go first? I do have to hop off real quick because I have a newborn baby, and a toddler and my wife needs a tag out soon. But there was nothing that I had planned. I thought, honestly, like this was, I was excited to do it, and I thought it even went way better than I was expecting. It was great. I loved everything Jen and Sean both had to say. And I think doing things like this is just really important. So I think if you're someone who's taking the time to listen to this or taking the time to watch this, it just shows that you're in a good mental space, that you're willing to get information and you're trying to take control of your health. And I think you should use that as motivation to start getting some alignment around, like, what are your core values? Like, what are some stressors in your life that you feel like you should start working on before you start adding the stress of, I have to hit this weight loss goal by this date or else I suck and I'm a failure, right? So I hope that, I think when people come into conversations like this, maybe they just want to hear, hey, this is how much protein you're supposed to eat, these are the calories you're supposed to eat, you should avoid this. But I really think the fact that we talk a lot about the emotional side of things and the social component and trauma, I feel like not enough people are having those conversations. And I think as long as people like us can continue to have them in a public forum and our listeners or viewers are emotionally bought into that and willing to have those conversations, then we can make some true change. So, I was more than happy with how this went. I thought it was great.
Awesome. Anybody else? Something you hoped I'd talk about or bring into the conversation?
Not that I'd hope you'd bring in. I think identifying these common, unique struggles that I think we probably experienced at some point, and most people do as well in terms of nutrition. Yeah, I wrote some down coming in, and like even just like thoughts that we could all spin, like what is one helpful solution for people? Because the struggles that I find common, and if any of you guys want to add any, time constraints, I'm too busy, my schedule, XYZ, emotional eating, so just eating based on feel, lacking the knowledge, not knowing the differences or the education around food and the decisions behind what they're making, social pressures, being pressured into, or the environment shaping what they're eating or drinking, cravings and addictions, that is real. Sugar is, it's up there. And this last one too, I just wrote poor operating systems, and not to blame, again, put any blame on our parents, but if we're raised a certain way and we don't actively become participants in our health, we could just kind of take what was kind of given to us and not change much, and it might not have been optimal, so those systems might not bring us to the results or the health that we want. So those are some common struggles I identified. I don't know if you guys have any that jump out or you would add to common people's struggles around nutrition. Does anything pop out?
Yeah, I really like all what you mentioned too. I think just to tagline on that is that, one thing that works for one person, there may be no way that works for you.
For
and
sure.
I think personalized nutrition and personalized health is something that I think is a lot of times missing. I will say though, there is a commonality to nutrition, and there is a somewhat of a blueprint I don't want to say blueprint because, then we get rigid with it. And we have to be careful the way we word different things in nutrition. But there is a commonality here, but we've all had so many different experiences. Like we've mentioned childhood trauma, the way we were raised, what we ate when we were younger, what was our mother having when she was pregnant? Were we nursed? Were we not nursed? Different things that developed us in life that now have changed the outcome of what we need now at this day and age and what our body needs. And I think, I hope for anybody listening is that it's important to take that in consideration and think about what your body needs and what you need, not what your friend needs, not what your neighbor needs, what you need, because it's going to be individualized to you and what your requirements are. And so I really like all the topics you mentioned, because I think all these things influence your health and influence what you're eating, what you take in every day.
Yeah, and then like the counter, Ethan, do you have any struggles that jump out?
No, I think I would dig deep on a couple that you said. That I think your list is pretty comprehensive. But I used to be a licensed master social worker, and I used to work in the field of addictions. And a lot of times, food is very like having an addiction. No different than alcoholism. No different than heroin or nicotine or any other kind of addiction that you might have. And I think two of the things that you said were really powerful, and that we don't give enough thought or effort to regarding nutrition is. People, your environment is a big part of it. And if you're going to change your nutrition, it means you're going to have some direct, honest, boundary setting conversations with people in your life because it's a big part of how your family is wrapped around a lot of that. And if you're not willing to have those kind of those conversations, then you're not going to be really successful in changing your nutrition, whatever your needs might. And you guys listed all these great changes that you could make with your nutrition, but none of those are really going to happen if you don't shape your environment appropriately. So I think that's a really big one. And I can't remember what the other one was about what you listed, but that was one that really stood out for me.
Yeah, it's okay to say no.
Boundaries and discipline is a big one, and especially too, I know people who don't have support of their family and their spouse can sometimes make it hard to even set those boundaries. I wholeheartedly agree that, food can act like an addiction. And when you live in a household that almost supports that addiction, it can make it even harder. And so setting those boundaries and having that sort of discipline can change, whether you're going to sink or swim.
Yeah, and there's depending on the individual too, if you're overweight, let's say, or obese or unhealthy, you can identify as these things are where I am at. When you are going to work towards to make a shift, it's that is an identity shift that is taking place that I have to live into. And I, again, am going to begin to do the things that the healthy version of me would begin to do, because I've laid this clear pathway of what an unhealthy, overweight, obese, whatever person would do. Those patterns are easy buttons to touch. And it is going to be a process that the process itself might be challenging for a certain period or a time, but it won't always be like that, because once I've laid enough groundwork, then it becomes about maintaining this new version of myself, this healthy version of myself. And I think, again, people can get wrapped up in the process being this lifelong thing, when it's the process is a certain or the journey, I should say, is ongoing, but there's a certain timeline of that's going to be a little bit more difficult, and then maintaining the more or the healthier, less weight, whatever it is, version of yourself that's doing more of the things that are in alignment with the new upgraded identity, that's a shift. And I think that has to happen between the ears, kind of like the underlying tone here of self-care, the mentality, de-stressing, upgrading ourselves, even just going off that list, saying no to people. I was just getting, I was at Tractor Supply getting chicken food for the chickens. And I brought my dog in, and they were all like, "Oh my goodness, look at this dog! Can we give her a treat?" And my dog only eats raw food and eggs and vegetables. I'm sorry, raw food, eggs, and fruits. And I saw the little treat that they had, and I was like, I appreciate the offer. I'm gonna say no on this one, and not feeling guilty about no, whether it's something like that for my animal, or I'm out and I don't drink alcohol, and people are like, "Oh, let's have a drink." It's I'm gonna pass, man. Thank you though. Like let's have a good time. Like being okay with saying no, going back to the social environment, I'm not less than. I'm not without worthiness because I'm not, drinking or eating poorly or whatever the decision. And that's a step in self-empowerment. That's another leg along the way towards the healthier, more empowered version of ourselves. And we just lay groundwork every day.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
I
really
think
like
that's a
that
big part
point.
of it. Yeah, just stating who, because like you said, when you are creating a new identity, you really have to communicate a lot to other people about what is the new identity and how am I going to be acting so that they can fall in line. And most people will. That's just if you're not willing to put it out there and talk about it because it might be a little embarrassing. Mom's favorite macaroni and cheese might not be something you're eating anymore, and you have to have that conversation with her. That's hard, and most people will just succumb to, okay, I'll eat it and keep my mouth shut. So that's awesome. Okay, any last thoughts before we hop off this amazing panel?
No, this is great. Thank you for having us.
Of course.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Those who listen, come back, listen, or have taken any nuggets away, again, maybe not everything, but maybe one thing, like one thing in the right direction. And then maybe I'll just stack that from there. So if you come this far, fist bump.
Awesome. Well, so much gratitude for all you all for being on this panel. Thank you so much. And we'll catch you on the next one. Have a good one. Take care.
Thank you, Ethan.
Bye.